Lord of the Mysteries. Chapter 1356. Urgency. After stabilizing his anchors, the will of the celestial worthy, and the weak balance of his consciousness, Klein leaned back in his chair and observed the various powers brought about by the attendant of mysteries beyond her characteristic. Among them, there were three most important ones. They were all grasped by Klein using Sapphira Castle and the curtain ahead of time, but he just didn't know the exact names. The first was regenerate. If the materials that made up an item once had a spirit body, then the attendant of mysteries could use the powers of regenerate to summon the corresponding spirit body threads, making the item become his marionette. Then, he could establish a deep connection with the item and also naturally transform it into a marionette. To put it simply, an attendant of mysteries couldn't allow something that didn't have spirit body threads to produce spirit body threads, but he could allow some items to regenerate their spirit body threads that had long disappeared. The former represented metallic items, gold coins, gold pounds, and so on. The latter mainly consisted of beef, fish, and other food. Once humans ate food that were marionettes, they would also transform into marionettes, as though they had encountered intense corruption. The second was reassembly, which was also known as tampering. It could reassemble many physical objects or abstract concepts into something different, resulting in an unbelievable effect. It was like changing the definition, logic, orientation, or rules. The third was the realm of mysteries. This was an ability used to create an embryonic form of a divine kingdom. It could bring about a certain concealment effect. Reassembly represents the authority of change, while the realm of mysteries represents concealment. The two essential elements of the fool's symbol are in place. However, reassembly and tampering doesn't sound nice, and the meaning isn't clear enough. Grafting is still better. It's obvious at a glance. Klein mumbled inwardly before casting his gaze around. Now, he had deepened his control of Sapphira Castle. He could directly borrow the powers nearing sequence 0 of the seer pathway. He could also use most of the beyonder powers below sequence 0 of the marauder and apprentice pathways. It was quite similar to Dark Angel Sasser from back then. Of course, Dark Angel Sasser could only use the first blasphemy slate to indirectly use the powers of the Chaos Sea. As for Klein, he was the owner of Sapphira Castle, one that hadn't fully gained control of the Sapphira. Therefore, his level was higher than Dark Angel Sasser's. As for strength, in theory, he was stronger, but his strength was affected by too many factors. Having only become a beyonder after a few years, Klein couldn't guarantee that he would definitely be able to defeat Heaven's Deputy and the left hand of God. In short, he was now considered a king of the King of Angels, and he was very close to the level of a true god. After gaining a deeper grasp of Sapphira Castle, the difference between me in here and in the outside world is almost gone. It wouldn't result in me being a king of angels outside but having the power of a true god in Sapphira Castle. The greatest advantage here is it provides me a defensive barrier that even a true god can't break. Yes, whether the outer deities can do it remains to be seen. Klein slowly exhaled as he focused his attention on the current situation. There were two things he was most worried about at present. The first was the primordial moon, which was also the mother goddess of depravity. Although she failed to fully descend into the real world with Mr. Door's return, a little portion of her strength had invaded. Furthermore, she maintained it for a few seconds under the attacks of the 5 orthodox deities of Evernight, Steam, and company. Whether this would affect the surroundings, the corresponding pathways, and exert certain effects on some matters remained to be seen. Second, Angel of Time Amon has already stolen Mr. Door's ritual and became sequence 0 of the Marauder pathway. He would be Klein's most direct and most powerful enemy. I wonder if Amon has taken the opportunity to accommodate Mr. Door's uniqueness and sequence 1 key of stars. If he has completed this step, he will be the most powerful true god in the real world. I wonder how he compares to the Evernight goddess. No one knows how much of the death and god of combat uniquenesses the goddess has accommodated. Typically speaking, Amon shouldn't have the time to accommodate the apprentice pathway's uniqueness. Although Mr. Door's return is equivalent to the ritual itself, the most important matter at that moment was to replace Mr. Door, allowing the three sequence 1 beyonder characteristics and the uniqueness of the Marauder pathway to gather together, resulting in a qualitative change. There's no time to accommodate the uniqueness of the apprentice pathway. Also, this operation has a high chance of awakening the celestial worthy. Amon wouldn't take such a risk. In other words, Amon's subsequent focus is to accommodate the uniqueness of the apprentice pathway and become a true god of two pathways. Otherwise, under the watch of the other true deities, it will be very difficult for him to finish off a king of angels like me. Furthermore, even if he does take the risk and succeeds, him having accommodated the apprentice pathway's uniqueness means that he has to slowly adapt and stabilize his condition, making it impossible to deal with me in a short period of time. I have to make use of the time to become the fool. Only by doing so can I use Sapphira Castle and my own level to resist Amon. I don't have much time left. Klein silently gave a self-deprecating comment. He leaned forward and gently tapped the edge of the long model table. He was analyzing the possibility of him becoming the fool in a short period of time. The digestion of the Attendant of Mysteries potion was relatively simple. By the time Klein used his anchor and consciousness to suppress the awakening of the celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings, and not lose control or become someone else, he could use Sapphira Castle to create an avatar like Amon. Then, he could use the power of Sapphira Castle to steal the undigested Attendant of Mysteries beyonder characteristic he got from Zeradol. At this point, Klein would immediately turn the avatar into a marionette to prevent any unexpected developments. This way, Klein would drop to the level of an Attendant of Mysteries who had fully digested the potion, and he would have an Attendant of Mysteries marionette. This was one of the main ingredients of the potion. And the Attendant of Mysteries who had digested the potion was qualified to consume the Fool's Potion and become a Sequence 0 true god. These series of operations weren't too complicated, but it was prone to mistakes. Furthermore, an ordinary dual Sequence 1 King of Angels from the Seer pathway couldn't do it unless they have a Sequence 2 Trojan Horse of Destiny friend of the Marauder pathway who's willing to sacrifice himself to provide help. Of course, a Sequence 1 Worm of Time friend could do it. Therefore, to Klein, the most troublesome thing was the other two matters: first, how to deal with the half-fool of the Antigonus family, and secondly, how to complete the ritual of fooling time, history, or fate. With my current level and strength, it isn't impossible to deal with the Antigonus family's ancestor. Of course, the prerequisite is that I should first familiarize myself with the corresponding beyonder powers and changes in Sapphira Castle. Sigh, I don't have any idea on how to approach the fool's ritual at all. Klein raised his hand and pinched his forehead, casting his gaze at the grayish-white fog beneath Sapphira Castle. Among time, history, and fate, he was undoubtedly more familiar with history. Now, he could use Sapphira Castle to directly influence the fog of history, allowing the corresponding powers of the seer pathway to become stronger or weaker. This was the embodiment of authority. Fooling history. Fooling history. Klein tapped the edge of the long model table again as various thoughts flashed through his mind, but he repeatedly wrote them off. In his opinion, all the possible solutions didn't satisfy the requirements of fooling history. This was because history objectively recorded what had happened. Whatever happened was definitely reasonable. And the solutions that could satisfy the requirements, such as returning to the past, consuming the potion, and becoming the fool that came from history, wasn't able to achieve it. At the very least, Klein had never seen the ability to reverse time. As his gaze moved deep into the fog of history, Klein suddenly had a feasible idea. The present reality of history was this: the Tarot Club members believed that they were following the fool that didn't belong to this era, an awakened ancient god or an existence that surpassed an ancient god. In fact, Mr. Fool was originally just an ordinary person hanging above the gray fog. He used all sorts of resources to package himself and improve himself. Klein's thoughts were inspired by Amon. He could use Sapphira Castle to create an avatar, and let the avatar use Sapphira Castle to steal the fate, consciousness, anchors, and Zeradal sequence one attendant of mysteries beyond her characteristic. Therefore, the main body's beyonder characteristic was formed purely from the one inside the curtain, in which the celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings was slowly awakening in. This way, the understanding of the Tarot Club members was correct. Mr. Fool was a great existence that was awakening. This went against the true history, but it was a fact grounded in reality. It could fulfill the requirements of the ritual. Of course, the premise was that the act of stealing an avatar needed to happen in Sapphira Castle or other concealed areas. Otherwise, it would also be recorded in history, preventing it from achieving the effects of fooling. As for how he was to deal with the celestial worthy of heaven and earth for blessings when he awakened, and how his avatar was to kill his true form and make him a potion, Klein was temporarily out of a solution. The result of this attempt is equivalent to suicide. Before being killed by the celestial worthy, my avatar's attendant of mysteries beyond her characteristic would have been digested by then. After all, I successfully revived the Lord of the Mysteries. Klein shook his head and threw the incomplete plan to the back of his mind. Under the circumstances where he couldn't think of a solution, he decided to seek advice from the existences that might know what to do. He had two targets. One was Snake of Fate Will Septon, and the other was the Evernight Goddess. The former might have some thoughts about fooling fate, while the latter probably knew what kind of ritual the ancestor of the Antigonus family used to accommodate the fool's uniqueness. After stabilizing his mental state, Klein left Sapphira Castle and directly teleported to Backlund.